Hello everyone, welcome back to Yihan's channel. Long time no see. Anyway, so happy to have you here again. Today we are going to talk about the long-lasting, deep, intertwined, and yes, sometimes toxic relationship between China and Japan. A few months ago, the worsening relationship between the two countries was in the headlines for a while. But recently, with everything going on in the world, it seems to have faded from the spotlight. It's no longer the center of the storm. Watching what's happening now, I really find myself wanting to understand the deeper historical roots of these conflicts. I did some digging and it turned out to be such a complicated story, and it reminded me of the complicated emotions between China and Japan. As a Chinese person, Japan is a topic you just cannot avoid from a very young age. Looking back, I realize how much our attitudes towards Japan have shifted over the years. I have this rough impression that every 5 to 8 years or so, the relationship hits some kind of extreme, usually a negative one. And with that comes a wave of ultra nationalist sentiment. For example, in my city, there is a Japanese supermarket. On normal days, it's incredibly popular, woven into the daily life of locals. For decades, people have trusted it. There are certain groceries my family would only buy there, and I know many other families feel the same. But whenever anti-Japanese sentiment flares up, especially in the early 2000s, that same supermarket got smashed by mobs more than once. And once the wave passed, life went back to normal and the store was full again. So nowadays, most of these tensions trace back to World War II, or as we call it in China, the anti-Japanese war. That feud has lasted nearly a century, and it seems like there is no easy way out. But today, I'm not going to talk about that. It's too big, too complex. Instead, I want to go further back into the long history between us before the war. To many Westerners, China and Japan look almost the same. The people, the culture, even the writing system. But if you tell a Japanese person or a Chinese person that you two are basically the same, both would be furious. And they're right, we have real distinct differences. We are two different cultures, but at the same time, no one can deny the deep connections between us. I guess watching the wars happening in the Middle East, I feel just as ignorant as some people might feel watching China and Japan. And honestly, as someone who grew up being taught those horrific images of the Second World War, and as someone studying modern Chinese history, I know more details about that war than most. But I realized I barely understood the full story between these two countries, the whole story, I mean. So I started digging, and I think really trying to trace the origins of this relationship might help us understand the field we are dealing with today. Maybe it can even offer some insight into other conflicts happening around the world. Both Chinese and Japanese scholars have devoted their lives to studying this relationship, but because of the different standpoints, they often cannot agree on some issues. So today I want to explore this history based on the work of an American scholar, Ezra Vogel, and his book China and Japan Facing History. Maybe an outsider's perspective can offer something a little more objective. So, without further ado, let's start. In short, this relationship has shaped the destiny of a continent for 2 millennia. This is a story of one civilization gave another its written language, its religion, and its blueprint for government. Then the student surpassing the teacher, going to war, and eventually the roles reversing completely. This is a tale filled with profound cultural depth, brutal conflicts, and the complex, often painful struggle for leadership in East Asia. And the ghosts from the past continue to haunt their relationship today, from disputes over some islands to the struggle over how to say "I'm sorry" and "thank you." Long before any conflict, there was a deep, transformative flow of culture from the continent to the Japanese archipelago. Archaeological evidence shows that as early as 1000 BC, during Japan's Yayoi period, Chinese tools and mirrors were making their way over, likely through the Korean peninsula. But the real story begins in earnest with the unification of China under the Sui and later the Tang dynasties. For Japan, China was the pinnacle of civilization. It had a written script, a sophisticated bureaucracy, a universal religion in Buddhism, and a philosophical system in Confucianism, and that promised the social order. Imagine Japan in the 6th and the 7th centuries. It had no writing system. Not even priests or officials could read or write. That all changed with the arrival of Buddhism and the dispatch of official missions to China. From 600 to 838 AD, Japan sent wave after wave of diplomats, monks, and students to the Tang capital, Chang'an, today's Xi'an. The impact was total. They adapted Chinese characters or kanji to write their own language. They embraced Buddhism, which Prince Shutoku actively promoted, seeing it as a source of both spiritual and political power. Japan's ruling elite began compiling histories like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, in perfect imitation of Chinese dynastic records, using the past to legitimize the rule of their emperors. They built their new capital, first Nara and then nowadays Kyoto, on a great pattern directly inspired by Chang'an. They studied Confucianism with its emphasis on loyalty and ritual to create a more centralized state. In 701, they established the Taiho Code, a legal and administrative system modeled on the Tang's. It's astonishing to think that this wholesale transformation was achieved not by a massive invasion or immigration, but by a relatively small number of Japanese travelers and Korean scribes and artisans who brought this knowledge with them. Men like the scholar monk Kuka and the statesman Abino Nakamura, who even passed the Chinese imperial exams, became living bridges between these two worlds. For China, this was a one-way street. We were confident, even arrogant, in our cultural superiority. Civilizing the barbarians was a political strategy. We didn't fear being surpassed. After 838, the official mission stopped. For the next 1,000 years, the teacher-student dynamic faded, replaced by a long, complicated era of trade, piracy, and two dramatic field invasions. From 838 to 1862, official diplomatic relations were largely absent. Trade, however, continued. During China's Song dynasty, commerce boomed. Chinese ships steadier than Japanese ones sailed between Ningbo and the Japanese port of Hakata. Copper coins from China even became a key part of Japan's economy. But without formal ties, this trade often operated in a gray area, leading to conflict. The first major military clash came not from a Japanese or Chinese leader, but from the Mongol conqueror Kublai Khan. After subjugating Korea, the leader of the Mongol Yuan dynasty set his sights on Japan. In 1274 and again in 1281, he launched massive fleets to invade Kyushu. The first invasion was repelled. The second, and far larger, met a similar fate when a massive typhoon smashed the Mongol fleet. The Japanese called it kamikaze, the divine wind, believing the gods had protected their sacred land. This idea would echo centuries later, with tragic consequences in World War II. The second phase of this millennia was marked by the return of formal but unequal relations. In the early 1400s, a weaker Japan under the Ashikaga shogun agreed to enter China's tributary system. This meant the Japanese shogun had to acknowledge the Chinese emperor as his superior in exchange for the right to trade. The Japanese shogun Yoshimitsu was heavily criticized at home for this humiliating subservience. As trade relations broke down again, A new figure emerged in the 16th century, the wako, or Japanese pirate. For the Chinese, these were coastal riders, plundering and smuggling, but the reality was more complex. Many so-called Japanese pirates were actually Chinese merchants and even disgruntled soldiers taking advantage of the ban on trade. The Ming general Qi Jiguang became a national hero for his campaigns against them, a reputation he holds to this day. Then came the third and most devastating clash. In the 1590s, Japan was reunified under the ambitious warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi. After a century of civil war, he set his sights on a larger prize, conquering Ming China. His plan was to march through Korea. From 1592 to 1598, Japan invaded Korea, plunging the peninsula into a brutal war. While the Japanese won battles, they couldn't secure a final victory. The war became a bloody stalemate. Chinese Ming forces intervened to save their tributary state Korea. The war ended in 1598 with Hideyoshi's death. There were no winners, only losers. It left Korea in ruins and seeded a deep-seated Korean and Chinese resentment towards Japan that would fester for centuries. For the next 250 years under the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan and the Qing dynasty in China, the two countries maintained a very distant peace. Trade was strictly controlled, confined to the port of Nagasaki, where Chinese merchants were confined to what became a Chinatown. Japan's pride grew as China was conquered by the Manchu, some Japanese elites began to feel a new sense of superiority. The students were starting to see the teacher as diminished. The 19th century shattered both nations' isolation. The arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships in Japan in 1853 and Britain's victory over China in the Opium Wars a decade earlier sent shockwaves through East Asia, but they responded in radically different ways. Japan's response was swift and dramatic. The Meiji Restoration of 1868, they launched a frantic top-down project of modernization, summed up by their slogan, enrich the country, strengthen the military. They sent the Iwakura mission, a delegation of top leaders on a 2-year world tour to study everything from industry to education. The contrast with China's response is stark. China, vast and confident in its own centrality, launched the self-strengthening movement, which aimed to adopt Western military technology while preserving its core Confucian system. It was a half measure. Japan's visitors to Shanghai at that time were shocked. One delegate, Kumi Kunitaki, described the filth and decay, lamenting that his countrymen still imagined China as a land of refined scholars. By the 1880s, Japan had a modern conscript army, a nascent industrial base, and a powerful new sense of national identity. The emperor was reframed as a divine figure, on par with the Chinese emperor, a status China officially acknowledged for the first time in 1887. The inevitable flashpoint was Korea. For China, Korea was its most important tributary state, a buffer against Japan and Russia. For Japan, Korea was a dagger pointed at its heart and a source of coal and rice battle for its new economy. Tensions boiled over in 1894 when a Korea rebellion broke out. Both countries sent troops. When the rebellion was over, Japan refused to withdraw and seized the Korean king, effectively starting the First Sino-Japanese War. The world watched in disbelief. Japan crushed China, its modern navy, annihilated the Chinese Beiyang fleet. The Japanese army swept through Manchuria and took the strategic port of Port Lushun in an event that shocked the world with its brutality, the Port Lushun massacre. The Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895 was a catastrophe for China. We were forced to recognize Korea's independence from China's orbit, pay a massive indemnity, roughly 3/4 of the government's annual revenue. cede Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands to Japan, a wound that has still not healed, open more ports to Japanese trade. The roles had completely reversed. In a matter of months, Japan had not only defeated its ancient teacher but had been accepted as an equal by the Western powers. China, meanwhile, was humiliated and carved up like a melon by foreign powers. For Japan, it was a moment of intoxicating triumph. After centuries of looking up to China, they had finally gotten their revenge. They saw themselves as Asia's new modern leader. In a twist of historical irony, the defeated China now looked to its conqueror for a path to survival. For the first time in over a millennia, the flow of knowledge reversed. China began to learn from Japan. The Chinese leadership drew two conclusions. Cozying up to Japan might counter the other Western powers, and Japan's rapid modernization offered a shortcut for China's own revival. The call was famously made by the reformer Zhang Zhidong, learn from Japan. And learn they did. While Japan's ancient study of China involved a few hundred monks and diplomats, this new wave involved tens of thousands. From 1896 to 1937, an estimated 50,000 Chinese students went to Japan. They studied its military, law, education system, politics, and so on. The list of these students reads like a who's who of 20th century China. For example, Lu Xun and Guo Moruo, the fathers of modern Chinese literature. Chen Duxiu and Li Dazhao, who studied at Waseda University and went on to co-found the Chinese Communist Party. Zhou Enlai, the future Prime Minister of the PRC, Chiang Kai-shek, the future leader of the nationalists. In Japan, these students saw a modern, efficient, and relatively open society. For the first time, they saw themselves as others saw them, citizens of a once great civilization that had fallen behind. They absorbed the revolutionary ideas. Japanese books became the primary channel through which Western philosophy, science, and socialist thought flowed into China. Japanese advisors helped build China's modern police force and legal system. The very language of modern China is filled with wasa kango. Japanese coined words from modern concepts like society, revolution, and economics. This era of intense exchange created a generation of Chinese leaders who understood Japan intimately, but it also coincided with Japan's own turn towards militarism and imperial expansion. The same Japan we admired for its modernity would soon become our nation's greatest enemy. This brings us to the most painful chapter, Japan's invasion and occupation of China from 1937 to 1945, an extension of its earlier colonization of Taiwan and its creation of the puppet state of Manchukuo. It's a period of unspeakable tragedy. The Nanking Massacre, the use of chemical and biological weapons, and the systemic exploitation of China that I can't fully cover in this video, but it is the essential organizing backdrop to the relationship today. And so we return to Professor Ezra Vogel. He wrote that he wasn't naive enough to believe that mutual understanding alone would automatically improve relations, and he was right. Today, the relationship between China and Japan is haunted by history. It's a relationship where two countries can't seem to move past two simple phrases. China says Japan has never said "I'm sorry" enough or "sincerely" enough for the atrocities of the war. Every prime ministerial visit to the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors the war criminals, is seen as a provocation. The history textbooks that some say whitewash Japan's actions are a constant source of friction. Japan, on the other hand, feels that China has never said thank you. After its reform and opening up in 1978, China received billions of dollars in official development assistance from Japan, loans and aid that helped build China's infrastructure and fuel its economic miracle. Many Japanese feel this generosity has been met with silence and a relentless focus on the past. This historical baggage is then loaded onto very real present-day conflicts. The dispute over the Diaoyu or Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea is not just about fishing rights or potential oil reserves, it's a symbol of sovereignty and national pride, directly tied to the legacy of Japan's 19th century imperialism and the unequal treaties China was forced to sign, and also the recently speak from the Prime Minister of Japan. It also provoked the Chinese emotion. The history between China and Japan is a profound testament of the power of cultural exchange and the devastating consequences of imperial ambition. It's a cycle of learning, conflict, and role reversal. China was the teacher, then the student. Japan was the student, then the conqueror. But the show hasn't finished yet. The reversal is still unfolding. And under today's global circumstances, where shall we go? Where can we go? For now, I think we can only hold on to what historian Vogel called sympathetic understanding. We need a clear-eyed view of the pride, the pain, and the complex interdependence that has bound these two great civilizations together for about 2,000 years and take something away from it for the future. Okay, that is all we are gonna talk today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. I'm also looking forward to see your comments here. Thank you so much again and see you in the next video.